Okay, so good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone. Welcome back on this Monday morning. So I know that sometimes it's a little hard to get back in the groove of the week after a weekend and the holidays coming up. You can see I've been busy with my background here on getting ready for the holidays. So I hope all of you are doing well. And we have a very packed day today. So before I get started, are there any questions, any things that I can start off with before we launch into content? Okay, ready to learn? Okay, I am going to share my screen for this very beautiful slide we have here because it's a nice way to start. All right. So can everyone see this beautiful horizon? All right. We're still sharing my screen correctly this time. I'm so excited to have you all here. I'm going to go ahead and drop in the chat, making sure I send it to everyone. Motivation. So a Monday morning motivation. All right. So, what motivates us as managers, and how can we listen to understand how to be, how we can be an effective listener? So, how we really are getting our active listening going to really hear beneath just what not only with the surface of what somebody says, really, but to get underneath of the why and to determine what feedback is, why it's important and when and how to give feedback. So that's what we're going to be covering today. So I hope you are motivated to learn again on this Monday morning, afternoon, and evening for some. So one thing I want to say is to make sure that you get a piece of paper and or pen or pencil. We will be using this later on, so I don't want you to have to stop what you're doing to go find one of those. We don't use it this very second, but I want you to make sure that you have it available for later. So again, this beautiful horizon, and we are going to talk about the things that motivate you and others. So curious as we get started here, I'm going to drop this in the chat. And if you could write in the chat, what are the things that motivate you at work? What are those things? Achievements. I like that. So being able to achieve your impact, mission. Yeah, I love that we're writing about impact and mission because I'm going to come back to that in just a moment. As others are thinking about what motivates you at work, influence, recognition. This is great. One thing that would cause you to leave your job if to go to another employer. So we have what motivates you, positive feedback, right? These are all the things that would motivate you. What would cause you to leave to go to another employer? Bad manager, workplace environment, stagnation, dissatisfaction. Yes, this is wonderful talking about these things that motivate you and that also might cause you to leave. So here is a theory of motivation, Hertzberg's theory of motivation. And he said that there are motivators that seem to have the potential to cause long lasting satisfaction. And he called these the motivating. factors. So I love how we use the exact words on here. Somebody wrote achievement. That's the first one that they have up here. Recognition, someone wrote that too. So we're right along with the motivators in terms of that advancement, growth, responsibility. And then he talked about these hygiene factors. And what we're really saying about these hygiene factors are these are the things that not necessarily are going to encourage employees to work harder, but they will cause employees to become unmotivated if they're not present, right? So if these things aren't present, then you would be unmotivated, but they aren't necessarily things to encourage employees to work harder. Now, this theory was developed 50 years ago. And this theory was done in Pittsburgh, in the United States, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, among engineers and accountants in corporate America. What strikes you about being similar or different, given when this was developed and what we've written down now? What comments might you have on this? And again, I will stop the share for a moment so I can make sure if there's anybody's hands that are up. 50 years ago in Pittsburgh, in corporate America. What strikes you about this? Similarities, differences?
I mean, it's based on the experiences of white men, which are not everybody's experiences at all.
Absolutely. And isn't that interesting that this is such a small segment, and yet a lot of what was written is actually on this slide. So I won't keep on digging for this because I think it's just an interesting thing. Again, 50 years ago, a bunch of white men came up with this, and there are all these relevant qualities that have come up in terms of what are motivating factors and what are hygiene factors. And so I wanted us to think about that for a moment, that we have put a lot down here that others that have come up before. And I want us to think about how those motivations play out in the workplace. Now, I think what's really important to consider as well is the specific sector that we're in, and that international development is usually mission driven. So one thing here that we see the work itself, but how motivating it is to really be part of a mission. I think that's important to consider, and also to think about your own motivations. And again, as we know that there are, we like some group chats here, or breakout rooms, I thought it would be a good idea so that we could also talk a little bit about this and about where you might have been motivated or unmotivated at work, and what role your manager played in that. Okay, so I'm going to drop that into the chat. There's the questions. All right, also feel free to discuss this theory of motivation. And we'll go ahead and get started. Joyce, we're ready for our first group. Again, we're going to do 3 people and 7 minutes. So you'll have 3 people in your group. You'll have 7 minutes to discuss this theory of motivation, times where you were motivated or unmotivated at work, and really think about the role your manager played on this. Okay, we'll go ahead and get started. Okay. Okay, well, welcome back. Welcome back. I just had a group say maybe that was a little bit more time than you needed. I'm not sure. Was that true? Did you have ample time to discuss this? Yes. Okay, good. So we're starting to get this breakout room working in terms of the timing. So how did that go, especially that role of the manager? Would someone like to share?
Yeah, I said that, I personally feel motivated as a manager when I see my like direct report excelling in her position. And it particularly gets me excited when she receives like positive feedback from other teams that we support. It just makes me feel like, okay, I'm doing a good job as a manager then maybe. So when she receives that positive feedback and she excels at her position, it gets me motivated in my own position.
That's wonderful. I like hearing that. And that can sometimes be, how some of the discrepancy, right, between managers. Maybe they, to be able to feel that the recognition that your direct report is receiving is a reflection of you, because sometimes that's not the case how managers feel about their direct reports. Jen, go ahead.
Yeah, along the same lines, or similar lines, we do something at SI that I really appreciate, which is Monday morning shout outs. And so every Friday, the CEO sends an email and says, send me any shout outs you want to give. And then Monday morning, that goes out to the entire company. And she did something different this last week that I really appreciated. We just wrapped up an evaluation. And so I sent a shout out to her for a couple of people who had really supported the work and who I really appreciated, and then feeling like, okay, that reflects on me. There was a project assistant, which is our lowest level, who had done some technical writing, and that reflects on me because I gave him the opportunity to do that. Not all technical directors would do that. But then she came back to me and she said, did you also work on this? And I was like, yes, I did. This is my role. And I haven't had a chance to look at that email yet, but I'm betting she included me in the shout out, even though, I sent it for everybody else, but I'm betting that she included me, where I was thinking like it would reflect on me indirectly because I was highlighting the staff, the other staff.
That is so great, and I really appreciate hearing that, and I like how we're going to the positives today on this Monday. We're saying, okay, this is what motivates me as a manager, and it's my team who is doing really well, and I feel like that recognition is my recognition. And what I'm also hearing, Jen, of what you're saying as well, is that she's, your manager or the person that you're talking about is really listening, right? She's listening to not only what you're saying about your team, but she's listening to you highlighting your team. And that to me demonstrates active listening, because sometimes listening can be hard. Right? And I want us to demonstrate this a little bit, about how listening can sometimes be a little challenging. And I won't say more, but this is what we're going to do. So this is going to put our active listening hats on. So I'm going to give you some instructions. And I'm going to try to be very clear with my instructions, because this is your opportunity to practice active listening right now. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to get into groups of 2. And what's going to happen is you had a pen and a paper in front of you. One person needs that pen and paper. And what's going to happen is that person A will open a link that I'm sending the whole group, and then person B will not. And what's going to happen is that there's going to be a picture on this link, and I want you to have person A, who opens the link, describe it to person B. Okay, so person B, don't open that link, please. Now, what's going to happen is that person A is going to describe it, but person B cannot ask questions. Okay. So you've got to listen carefully. And this time we're going to be a straight 5 minutes. So we'll have to keep the pleasantries to a minimum. and we are going to go jump right in. So so nobody opened this link yet, because in your groups, you're going to decide who's going to be person A and who's going to be person B. So person A, you'll open the link. Person B, you will not. Any questions on this activity? All right, everybody's got their pens and papers? Okay, so 5 minutes. Let's see how it goes. Welcome back. So that was an activity, huh? How did it go for everyone? And feel free to show me your pictures too. Ahmed, please.
Yeah, it was not very good, but actually I thought like I did like triangle instead of rectangle, because I thought like it's like directly I drew without like listening carefully to the description. We did well, I think, but not bad. But the thing that I did some of the draws here without listening carefully to the instructions. So I had to be more. I have to be more accurate next time to listen carefully.
Well, thank you, Ahmed. That's what we're going to be talking about right after we share about this activity, is that active listening, right? So how we are really making sure that we are hearing, right? Would somebody else like to share?
I think we did a really good job, but I did find myself like occasionally getting ahead of the description, being like, oh, it's like this. And then Eli would say something else. I'm like, oh, wait, no, I need to hold up before I like get the full description before I actually draw it or make lines on a paper. Like, so that's good. It was like a good lesson to learn for sure.
Absolutely. Would you mind sharing your picture or no? Oh, well, very well done. Yeah. Tiny, but very well done. Only just as hard to see on the screen, but that was, yeah, that looks like a pretty accurate description. Yeah, so, you know, we can move on to the as we go on, but does anyone else want to share? It was, I do enjoy this activity.
I'll share. I mean, I found it pretty easy, you know, just like listening to it. But I think when everyone had the same picture, I'm guessing, right? So when she said, looks like there's 2 stairs, I had already drawn like the house out, and I was like, oh, is that, like, in my head, I was like, would that be the outside of the house, the stairs, or the inside? And then so then I ended up drawing like 2 sets of, like, I guess, staircases, which like looks really weird, but
Interesting.
so I guess I thought about it differently.
Well, you know what, you made me think let me go ahead. I just pulled up the link because I'm realizing maybe not everyone has seen what it actually looks like. So this is what it looks like for those who hadn't seen it. Okay, so, you know, sometimes these kind of things are challenging. And now some of the things that had not come up in what you're talking about is any technology issues. Let's say somebody couldn't access the house, or maybe language issues could come up here, or, you know, knowing, yeah, your triangle from your rectangle. If you're thinking about it from that angle, literally angle, as well, that was bad. But so thinking about it in this way of, you know, not only can it be challenging sometimes to actively listen, but then there's all these other barriers that might be taking place on top of it. So we're going to spend a little bit of time right now actively listening to me on this one, because there's a lot of content about to come up. So please feel free to interrupt me or stop me again, or tell me if I'm going too fast, because this is what we're going to cover. And I'm going to show you my screen of what we're going to cover right now, so you are aware, and then I'm going to pop us back together so I didn't, just in case I miss any hands. So we're going to talk about active listening in this way. So this is an iceberg. It's one of consultants' favorite things to talk about, because with the iceberg, that there is a whole huge component that's really underneath the surface. So what people say is like an iceberg. They say what we are seeing is above the surface, but what about everything that is really happening underneath? And we might just hear, this is what I want, this is what I want. But we don't hear why people want it, what they mean, what their true motivations are. And most conversations happen at that surface level, what I want level. So I'm going to stop my share here, and so I can make sure I can see all of you, because what we really want to talk about is how do we start getting below the surface to understand more and find out why people want what they want. And, you know, as we said last week about that, when we're talking about influence strategy, how do we create a win-win-win? So understanding what people's motivations are and finding that convergence of interest is the key to really finding a solution that meets all people's needs. So here's a very basic example. So there's a mother and there's two kids, and they both are saying, I need the orange. Now, what can the mother do? Cut the orange in half. You get half, you get half. Let them give one of them the orange, let them fight it out. Nobody gets the orange. That's it. No orange for anyone. But if you ask, right now, again, it's a basic example, but if you want to hear what's below the surface, you want to ask, why do you want the orange? Because we're assuming that they just both want to eat the orange. And what you might find out is the answer is that one of them wants to use the rind to make a cake, and the other one wants to drink the orange juice. So finding out what the why is might lead you to solutions that you might not have thought of immediately, because you're just thinking of, I want, I need. So coming to that, example for you to kind of hear a little bit more about how you might get below the surface and finding some common ground. So how do you find a solution in understanding what's below the surface? Okay, so again, there's going to be some active listening here, because there's going to be quite a lot of content. I put in the chat the 4 areas that we're talking about right now, and the first one is unfiltered listening. So listen without responding, just absorb. Now, why is this hard to do? Well, because we tend to spend a lot of time forming a response rather than listening. And it's not that we're doing that on purpose in the sense of I don't want to listen to you. It's really because we're trying to come up with solutions and fixes to what we think the problem is, or that we're empathizing. I've felt similarly to how you're feeling. And so you have this thing going on in your head where somebody's talking and you're coming up with these things. So how do you dial back that noise? Right? And to be intentional, say to yourself, I'm really going to listen without layering on my experiences. I'm going to turn off my judgments here and preconceptions. I'm going to stop putting it through my filters, expectations, opinions, all these things, and practice, repeat, practice. Now this, again, it's not the easiest thing to do, to try to take all your filters off of that. And so then one way to, once you've kind of tried to dial all that noise back in your head, you reflect. Again, why is it hard to do? Because our natural response in a difficult conversation is to defend ourselves or not to validate another person's feelings, especially when they're coming at you and they're angry or they're frustrated, right? To really say, okay, it's important in these challenging conversations to make sure the other person feels that they've been heard. Have you ever been in those meetings where that person keeps on saying the same thing over and over and over again? It's usually because they don't feel heard, right? So if you acknowledge, right, if you acknowledge what they're saying, then they might be able to let it go. And it forces you, that reflection forces you to listen without those filters. Because if you have to say back whatever the person is saying, you're going to have to really concentrate on what it is they're saying, and therefore you don't jump to your response. So how do I do it? So repeating back the words without adding any other layers, right? This is where that little bit of judgment or sarcasm or irony will have to, again, take it off of what you're going to say and reflect back without adding any other layers. So if it's necessary and appropriate, you can even be transparent by saying, I want to repeat back to what I'm hearing, because this conversation is important to me and I want to make sure that I get it right. So if your boss says something like that to you and you're coming in, you're like, this horrible thing is going on, and let me understand what you're saying so that I make sure that I get it right. That feels that you're being heard, right? And if the person doesn't say it back right, it also gives the opportunity for the person to really explain it in a more cohesive way, right? And by doing this, by reflecting back, you're also reframing the words and emotions you hear, but with us that escalatory language. So, validating that person's emotions. And now you don't want to agree with them. We're not asking you to agree with them, but it says, it sounds like you're feeling angry about this. Because, studies show that just simply naming the emotion can immediately de-escalate. Again, because the person's feeling heard. And then inquire, ask questions. Why is this hard to do? Because we assume we know what we know, and we don't, and what we don't know, because we layer our own thoughts and beliefs onto another person's situation. I remember way back when I first started at the Red Cross, I had somebody that was a disaster victim come to me, and we were trying to give them assistance. And I was thinking, this person had been through this horrible thing. They had this big fire, and, I wanted to be there supportive and empathetic. And I was like, oh, I can understand what you're feeling. And ooh, was that the wrong thing to say? That person exploded at me. It's like, how could you possibly understand what I'm feeling? Because we think, right? We think we know, we understand another person's thoughts and beliefs when we really don't. I can't imagine how difficult this is for you, right? Because we're taking off our own beliefs from that. And it's important, especially in a challenging conversation, because we can really never know what somebody else's experiences are like until we ask them. So how do I do it? How do I do this? And we're going to have a few different models, a few different things we'll talk about how we have, open and honest feedback. But really what we're concentrating on is active listening. Help me understand why that's important. Inquire, avoid leading questions. And then finally, once you ask those questions, you're reflecting, you're really listening, you generate ideas. And it's to engage the other person with that end goal of finding solutions and moving forward. So I asked you to listen to me a lot right now. And so as we kind of move on into the feedback component, so we're listening and then we provide feedback, what questions might you have on this, or comments you might have on active listening?
I have a question.
Sure.
So let's say, let's say someone's working with someone who says things that sound like they're contradictory. So I've had that situation, and I'll say, I'll kind of follow kind of the same guideline that you just presented and say, okay, I want to make sure I understand this correctly, so I'm going to repeat it back. And then can you confirm if I'm getting this right? And then the person has exploded for no apparent reason. What tips would you give for navigating that kind of situation?
Well, there's two things here. One is what we're about to get into, which is the feedback part, right? So we were having that conversation. But what it sounds like, and again, the way you say it is that you reflect back, right? But then you just wait, right? Without asking the question of, did I get it right? Right? Because then it's like, no, you didn't. Roar, right? Like there can be this like immediate reaction. So just sort of, and again, you reflecting back. So you are trying to de-escalate the situation by just, again, repeating back, because what sounds like this person is really feeling not heard. And also, if you're saying it's contradictory, that's also happening in their brain as well, right? So if they're having their own struggle, it creates this difficult, a difficult place to be, both for the person and for you as the manager. So I can't imagine how you would feel in this situation. But again, think about it. It's not about you. And it's hard, right? Because you want to be, that's not what I said, or this is, but you just have to wait for that person to de-escalate. And a lot of this is, and we're about to get into feedback, right? So then how do you have that conversation? Does that
Thank
help,
you.
Eli?
Yes, thanks.
Okay. Okay. So as we're talking about active listening, right? So we get the information, we're trying our best to be, right, that star manager, right? That just always cool, calm, and collected. But then eventually we're going to have to get into feedback. So here's the question. What is feedback? Now I could be answering all this, but I'm assuming you don't want to hear from me this entire time.
Feedback, sorry for not raising my hand.
No, you're fine.
So feedback means like information, motivation, supportive coaching, like delegation. So it's like different type. It depends on the case itself, but it's information.
Perfect. Perfect. Again, because I think all of you know these answers, so we don't have to have me say it. So why is it so important then?
So you can learn and adjust.
Max, what'd you say?
Sorry, so you can learn and adjust kind of as you go.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. Because you know what? We don't always see ourselves as the way others see us, right? So it's very important as a manager to highlight both the positive and then the things that they might have some improvements on. So, you want to know what your strengths are, what you see, what your manager sees as your strengths, and as well as the areas of improvement and what you're contributing. The way Jen was talking about, here are all the contributions my team has done. I want to recognize them. But you know what? Why is it difficult? Go ahead, Ahmed.
Because sometimes it's a negative feedback, not always positive.
Yeah, it is. It's difficult because you know what? You don't really want to criticize someone, right? Nobody really wants to be in that position of like, oh man, how is Jane going to take this, right? Thinking about back to our case study, how are you going to give Jane that kind of feedback of what she is like as a manager? So it can be hard, and and giving and receiving praise can be hard too, right? Because sometimes people just don't like to be called out. So I'm not going to have you answer this question. I will start talking again about how to give effective feedback. And it's really effective feedback is when the receiver understands it and accepts it and can act upon it, right? So it's hard to give feedback to somebody that's not receiving it. So really, when we remember we were talking about before, so my intention here is, and then you can include some positive reinforcement of strengths. And what you want to do is describe the actual behavior and not the individual person. And it concentrates on the areas the receiver can control and do something about it, right? Because you don't want to give feedback to somebody that can't do anything about it. So, and it describes, it doesn't judge, and it avoids presenting the opinions if they're facts. So you've lost interest in your work. That is not going to be helpful for somebody. But it appears to me, I get the impression that right now, an X, Y, or Z. So when you do it, should be timely, right? Not at, you don't want to tell somebody a month from now, oh yeah, remember that one time in the meeting when you did this? That's not going to be helpful, right? You want to make sure you want to do it in timely, and that you can create these conversations between you and your direct reports, and also if you're managing up as well. But you want to be mindful of what the right atmosphere, right? You don't want to call someone out in front of other people, or if like the pressures are running high and the feelings are running high, you might want to choose, or if you've already said, you know what, I'd like to talk to you about, today's meeting on, and then you give an X time, right? So the person understands it. So you just want to make sure that a person is able to understand and receive the feedback. And there's a model here that also kind of, it's very simplistic again, but this is an onion. And it's important to think about this onion is because, we're all complex people. We're not just, one thing and that's it. I'm made of layers, and the very center is the personality, right? So somebody just might have a certain kind of personality, and we'll dig deeper into personalities at later on when it can be a little bit of a challenge. But at the end of the day, this is a very change resistance component, right? That personality, your basic personality. And then you have another layer about your attitudes. And those are all those formative influences, those attitudes that are also change resistant, but a little bit less so than the base personality. And then finally, the outer layer is that behavior, right? And so this is what is, it's like your wardrobe, right? How do you change your behavior based on where you're at? So you might have a different behavior at work than you do with your friends. You might change how you might act. Let's see, if you're, you might behave if you're on a panel giving a talk versus then you were, having a one-on-one with a boss that you really have a strong relationship with. So consider aligning behavioral feedback when you're talking about behavioral feedback, and also aligning it to organizational values, and then competencies. So we've been talking around this a little bit, and so we are going to get right into actual feedback. So what is the situation? Be specific, SBI model. So, at the meeting yesterday, when you, and then insert something here, when you interrupted someone, as a result, that person didn't have a chance to speak, right? So you label the behavior, or you label the situation and then describe the behavior. And then instead of it talking about your personality or who you are, you really want to focus on the consequence, on the result of your behavior. And we call this the SBI model: situation, behavior, impact. Okay, so we're going to have an opportunity to practice this in real time. But before I go on, what comments or thoughts do you have on this?
I have a question. So when you go through sort of an SBI response, do you sort of ask them like, well, is there a different way that you feel like you could have like handled it or responded, or like how do you sort of like then go beyond sort of just addressing that moment?
Yeah, so I think that you make a really great point, right? So once you do this, you're really wanting to see what the person says, right? Because let's say that the interruption was, I really actually didn't realize I did that. I don't want to do that in the future. So they might come up with the result. Or if I don't say what I'm thinking at the moment, I'm gonna forget it. Okay, so maybe then you decide together, maybe you should write it down. Right. So once you sort of put it the lay of the land, you hear what it is they're saying, and then you make a plan of action together. Because again, this is under the surface. We're figuring out what's going on here before we start making the next move. So I love that you asked that, because I think that that's a really important component. Do other people have any thoughts, comments, questions?
Yes, please. Like, actually, do you prefer giving the direct report instant feedback? Like, for example, if he keep doing his job good, keep giving him the same positive feedback. So do you think that's like overmining or exaggerating sometimes? If I keep like giving him kudos on the job that he should be doing, or we should like being like more like accurate or precise or anything about the feedback? Because also always giving the feedback, it's something like for everything is a bit boring if you have like a large number of team, like if you are managing like 10 or to 15 members, so you spend your time just giving feedback. So what do you think about that?
No, you make a really good point, because you don't want to be in feedback all day, right? And so that's why I think it's really important to get to know your direct reports, because as we said before, like they might want that good morning email, right? Or they might want that constant validation, right? You're doing a great job. You're doing a great job. Other people that it might absolutely annoy them, right? Like, I got it. Just come to me when you need it. So I think figuring out a little bit, and we talk about this in a little bit too, but figuring out what's important to your direct report so that you can adjust accordingly. So I think what's important, because when you're saying positive feedback, that's great. And it's nice to give your employees positive feedback. But I think this is also really important when you're trying to give some constructive feedback. Does anyone else want to? Yeah, go ahead, Jen.
But even with positive feedback, isn't it important to be really specific rather than just sort of generic that you're doing a good job? Because I think, especially if you're someone who has a hard time taking positive feedback, that if it's generic, it's easily dismissed. And maybe for anybody that's true. Whereas if it's very specific, that it makes it more concrete.
100%. Yeah. So you want to be specific, whether it's positive or negative, but just understanding that you want to do it in a manner in which that it's not overkill or not at all. Trying to figure out and moderate when it is you're giving it. Because if the person only hears positive feedback over and over and over again, then they're really not going to work on some of the areas that they can use to grow and develop. Because people, if all you're doing is I'm doing a great job, then how are you going to know where you could develop? So really being able to be intentional about how often and when, and are you on the scale of more negative than you are to the positive. So thanks for that. Well, so now you're going to have the opportunity to try this yourself. So we're going to go into groups. And each one of these groups you're going to have 2 people in each one of these groups. And I'm dropping this in the chat. Oh, it happened twice, sorry. Now we're only going to do one scenario, or we're only going to do 2 people. So you have, that came out kind of messed up, but this last part is the most important, all right? So there's managing up, right? So we're talking about feedback as if we're talking about our direct reports, right? But then we also have to give feedback to our bosses sometimes, right? And here's a scenario in which your boss is not giving you definitive answers on a timeline for your deliverables, and it's making it difficult to move forward on your project, right? So you need some answers, you need to move forward, and your boss is not giving them to you. So how do you give feedback to your boss about this, right? So there's going to be 2 people in a group. One person will be the boss. One person will be the direct report. And how do you use this model, the situation, behavior, impact, to get the information you need? Now I'm going to give you a long time for this because I want to make sure that you have a chance to talk about it, practice, because the hardest thing with feedback is really being able to do it in the moment. So you can think about these models, and then sometimes you kind of get a loss for words. So how do you say the words you want to say, especially in this kind of situation? Now, if you finish this in your groups, right? So one person is the manager, the other person is the direct report. You do this role play, you talk about it. If you have more time, because again, I'm going to give you 15 minutes for this activity. Here's another one. Now, this is the managing down, right? So managing up and then managing down. A staff member who reports to you is increasingly demonstrating a lack of motivation and a slight attitude about work responsibilities, so much to the point that you're getting complaints from other members of staff. Okay. So if you can take both of these scenarios, cut and paste them so you have them, so you can refer to them, right? And I'm going to do one last screen share of the model. Situation, be specific, behavior, when you, impact as a result, right? What are the consequences? Now you can even come into this meeting saying, my intention is, right? So really thinking about how do you use the words when you're having to have a difficult conversation. So if you get to the next scenario, make sure you swap the person that's receiving and giving the feedback so both people have an opportunity to have this. And what questions might you have on this activity?
So for the second exercise, it's just a conversation. There's no boss or direct report.
For the second one, you would be the person that's giving the feedback is the boss.
Okay.
So this is managing down. The first one is managing up. So yeah, there's always a boss and a direct report in this relation, in these scenarios. Which again, we're using this as an opportunity to try and to have this feedback. And it's a little bit different than being in a matrixed organization, I recognize. Okay, so we're gonna go ahead and we're gonna do 15 minutes on this.
Still applies to a matrix. I work in a matrix organization. I think it still applies.
Perfect. I'm glad you said that because we were going to come back to that. Because again, these are the up and down, but these skills are important no matter where you go. So thanks, Jen. All right, 15 minutes. We will see you.
Sure.
So welcome back, everyone. Thank you so much for taking that time. Hussam came back a little early, so I was asking him how his experiences were. So now, if you want to give it to the larger group.
Yeah, actually, Alexandria and I were discussing the scenario, and we agreed that what we call it like an active feedback is like something where we set expectation, and we're taking a specific task and a specific date, the deadline, and the intention at the same time, the outcome. And if this is not happening, what's the consequences at the end? Like trying to be clear, giving that task at the same time, clarifying the consequences. And it's so essential to have an effective communication channel, not just like writing. Sometimes a quick call might fix the issues. So that was about the first scenario. And then we speak a little bit about the second question about like complaining and trying to understand the attitude. Maybe one interesting point is trying to understand different personalities in the team. Some people tend to be like extrovert or introvert, and like such in terms of social manner, and working in multicultural environment is challenging. So approaching to all team members and one way is something not going to be working.
Great. Yeah, so you have to adapt based on who you're talking to. Wonderful. Anyone else want to share? Jen?
Yeah, it's interesting. Bailey and I were talking, and she raised a point that linked back to what I was saying about the matrix, about managing in a matrix. So in the second scenario, I was playing the supervisor, and in providing the feedback, I mentioned, I've been hearing from people, and she said that when she provides feedback, she really tries not to mention hearsay, which is a really reasonable and important thing. But then it made me think about the matrix situation, where you as a supervisor aren't necessarily working directly with your supervisees, and therefore may not have any other basis for providing feedback other than hearsay. And so that is a difference in the matrix system that can be challenging to deal with in providing feedback.
You make a great point. Yeah, how do we bring up some of these nuances in a way that doesn't create an automatic defensiveness, right? Because it's like, well, who have you been hearing from? And, what, or are you talking, so thinking that through as well. So thanks for bringing that up. And Max, you had some thoughts?
Yeah, so I feel I was in a group with Ahmad, and I think it was interesting because we both clearly, because we did both scenarios, and we clearly both came in with like a plan on how to give the feedback, but then we would throw like a curveball at each other as far as responses goes, and then you're just like, oh, okay, like how do I react to that, right? And so like just having to like either think on your feet, or like maybe it's a lesson in like, okay, try to anticipate different responses based on like what you know about this person, or something like that. So that was just like a good little like, I feel like, lesson to keep in mind.
That is so important. And it's actually perfect because it's leading us right into just what we're going to wrap up with. But one thing, again, we go back to active listening. So reflection, what you heard is, so if you need to bide yourself a little bit more time, right? You know, what I'm hearing you say is, you know, let me look into this and get back to you. You can try to also figure out a way so that you can absorb it as well. And then if you're the one receiving the feedback, right? So it was two different scenarios. Really just try to relax when you're getting feedback, and do that active listening, and be aware of your own limitations, right? When if you might have had enough, you know, you might have to say it, but in a way that, you know, you're really making sure that you're summarizing, reflecting on what you're hearing, asking for clarification if needed. And you know, you have the opportunity to exercise your opinion, to accept, reject, or put the feedback on hold. But really, you want to make sure that you let the person know that you've heard them, right? And if you might even appreciate what they said. You know, what I like about what you just said was X, Y, or Z, and I'm learning more about myself. I'm learning these things. So just being aware that both giving and receiving impact, or receiving information, is something that you have to think about the impact both on yourself and others. So what we're gonna do for homework is just quickly, and again, you might want to just do this right after today's session to think about it, is, you know, what did you observe? What did you really learn that will stay with you? And why is that important? And what will you do or change? Because it's important for you to think about this, not just in, okay, I just had a role play and this is what I would do. But as you said, and Max, it's like, well, you have the best laid plans, then I'm not really, you know, I wasn't expecting this, or I'm being confronted with any one of these emotions: anger, frustration, sadness, happiness. Like, what, you know, what are you anticipating, and then what are you really getting? So kind of thinking this through as you're doing this. And so in our just last few minutes, hopefully you've been able to cut and paste that in terms of what you're thinking about for your homework. Again, it's just for your own reflection. Is for the group in sort of a rapid fire, if we can do this, is one new thing I learned. What did you learn today? It may not even be new. So, but one thing that, you know, you're kind of reflecting on in these last few minutes, couple minutes. What are you going to take away? What's something new? Or the SBI model, yeah, situation, behavior, impact. You know, turning off your filters. That one is just so hard. It really is, you know, because we come in with our own filters, our own thoughts of how we're gonna, you know, of course we want to empathize or do these different things. So, you know, thinking about active listening. Thank you for writing that. And not about what I need, but what they need and how best respond to that. That's, again, these are really, you know, as we're doing 10 million things as managers, how do we think about all of this? And to listen without adding those personal assumptions. So as you're taking the time to reflect on your what, so what, now what, you know, you can see what other people are thinking about now, and making time to pause and reflect before responding right away, right? It's a work in progress, right? As I said at the very beginning of this, management is a journey, and it's learning new things and really trying to improve every day, because you know, among all the deliverables that we're trying to make, to be able to step back and think, all right, let me actively listen in the situation when your first thing is, I've got something else to do. I got to go somewhere else, or taking that time, pause, reflect, and thinking about your situation. Okay, well, thank you, everyone. Right on the dot again, 11:30 and Eastern Standard Time. I look forward to seeing you tomorrow morning, evening, or afternoon, depending on where you're at. I'll also stay on if there's any other questions, but otherwise, thank you and see you tomorrow.